All right, Victoria will become the first state in Australia to tax people who operate an Airbnb. It's part of a suite of housing reforms unveiled by the Andrews government today. The tax comes in the form of a 7.5% levy on short stay accommodation, with the aim of getting landlords to take their properties out of the Airbnb market and put them back in the long-term rental market. Here's the Premier Daniel Andrews earlier today.
I don't expect this to be universally popular. Some people will say it's too high, some people will say it's not high enough. Some people want Airbnb and these sorts of platforms banned, or some limit of 90 nights a year and stuff like that. Ultimately, there's a place for short stay. It's very important. A lot of people use it and like it. The issue is you can go down the path that other cities around the world, other jurisdictions have done, where you try and get rid of this as a platform and try and return all of that housing to the long-term rental market. But you have to police that. You have to enforce that.
For more on this, let's bring in Dr. Chris Martin, a Senior Fellow at the UNSW City Futures Research Centre, who looks into rental markets and housing affordability, so diving right into this sort of thing. So first of all, just short-term rentals, if it's being identified as a problem by the Victorian government, how much of a problem do you believe it is in terms of exacerbating the rental market, either Victoria or the rest of the country as well?
It has been a rising issue for some years now, and it's a big issue in some markets and not in others, and that's kind of an obvious thing to say, but there are some places throughout Australia where you find a very large part of the housing stock has been used and is being used quite intensively for short stay accommodation, and has been for quite some time. But in other places, it isn't the big news, and those places have other pressures on their markets. Generally speaking, across Australia, we've been very permissive of short stay accommodation, using our housing stock for tourism purposes. So this move by the Victorian government is a step towards trying to make some of those operations that might be a bit marginal in terms of whether it makes more money in rental or makes more money in short stay, pushing the needle back towards long-term rental accommodation.
Okay, and so that 7.5%, decent whack, not that much lower than GST. And remember, you've got to already have things like what the short-term letting company will charge you, cleaning fee, and that decision to either pay it yourself if you've got a property or make the person pay it. How will this go in terms of shifting the needle in your view?
Well, it'll make some short-term renting a bit more expensive, and so that'll make it a bit less attractive to consumers, to tourists, and that should knock out at the margin some short-term operations, some short-term stay operations, and so that should mean that relatively speaking, when a property owner is balancing up whether it's going to be better in short-term use or in long-term use, long-term rental, a few more of them will find that the equation points towards letting it out long-term. There's other approaches that could have been taken by the government, and that includes more locally specific regimes that might have been implemented by local councils. But what we're seeing is this statewide approach and a statewide levy of about, as you say, about 7.5%, I think it is.
So something more targeted, you're indicating, might have made more sense. We always talk around sort of the Australian market or Victorian market, but your point being there are some areas where perhaps people are not that keen on moving to. We don't have a rental crisis in that area, and people happy to provide Airbnbs, and it might be good for local tourism and perhaps some particular regional areas. So are you of the view it would have been better to have a targeted approach rather than statewide?
Oh, the sort of approach that I've been interested in and that I know other people have been proposing in Victoria has been at a local level. Councils could be, they might auction the right to property owners for them to operate short-term letting operations. And they might have if you like, a short-term letting budget that they'll offer so many permits, depending on their assessed their assessment of what the housing need in the community is and how much the community can bear, some of its housing resources being used for tourism resources instead. So that sort of locally responsive and a housing resource planning approach would be an alternative to the approach that the Victorian government has taken.